Hi, welcome to Inge's Knitting Lab Along and this knit along series on how to make the Lacy cable tee. In this episode we will talk about gauge swatching and the process of blocking and doing the final measurements. And once you have seen this episode, you will know why I stress that it is so important that for one, you do your own gauge swatching, and second, that you use the post-blocking measurements for sizing your tee. Before we dig into the details of the blocking and measurement process, let's have a look at the overview. I have brought 3 samples here for you to see so that I can demonstrate what I mean. This sample I have just knitted up and added the I-cord edge as you saw in another episode. So this is pre-blocking. This swatch I have just released from the pins. I blocked it yesterday and today it's dry and just releasing the pins. This one has been sitting for 2 more days without the pins, and you can see here that depending on which measurement you use, you will get very different gauge and size, hence size of your tee. So this is why I advise in the process you do the blocking and leave the swatch sit for a couple of days before you do the final measurements, because in this way the fabric will find its own equilibrium, its own self, I would say, and you can do the final measurements for your tee. Patience is key. I know it's a tough call and a big ask when you are making the gauge swatching and you just want to start your project, but I assure you it's worth the wait so that you get the circumference that you need. It is now time to do the blocking of the swatch, but please make sure to do the measurements first. I have tried to be so keen and eager to do the blocking that I actually forgot to do the measurements, and it is no big problem. You just have to do yet another swatch, but it is a bit of a waste of time. So when swatching or when measuring this kind of rib pattern, I always do it in the back, and I make sure not to stretch the sample. Just leave it be as it is and take your measurement tape or whatever nice device you have for measurement. I just use this simple one and I measure my 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and I start at this knit stitch here, being the purl on the other side, and we know we have these stripes in repetitions of 4, so 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. So 28 stitches, and I make sure to write now my notes because I forget so easily because a lot of stuff is going on. So 28 stitches, and now I will measure the number of rows, and this is my knitting direction. I added the I-cord last, so I will again do it on the wrong side, but in the knitting direction. So again, I take my measurement tape, and the knit stitches are a bit jumping and dancing, but try to find one which is fairly straight, and take your measurements here, and I will spare you for my counting. It is 28 rows, so I note here 28 rows. I almost forgot to do the height and width measurements, but luckily I discovered before blocking, and it is around 12.5 centimeters high. There you go. I'm ready for the soaking, so I have prepared a bowl of water here, added soap, and I use this Eucalan woolen soap. even though this is a plant fiber yarn. But that's how I do it, and I add approximately only 1/4 of a cap here to this amount of water. So now I just place the sample in the bowl and wait for 15 minutes, and then I will take up the sample and dry it and pin it. I will grab the sample and just squeeze out as much water as I can with my hands, like this, and place it here on the towel. And it's a white towel. I use this for swatching. So now we will see if there is excess dye in this yarn here. So I press as much as I can. You can also place it on the floor and do a stomp or walk on the towel. That would add more weight to it, and the more excess water you can get out, the faster it will dry, of course. But let's see if this will suffice. And yeah, no excess dye. So now I will pin the swatch, and I will make sure that we can see the pearl stitches here, and I just turn it in the knitting direction, and it always curls a bit here in the sides, but I will take these blockers, blocking pins, and place it on the mat. And don't over block or under block. I think it will make sense when you see that these should be in an angle of 90 degrees from your pins here. So let me just do this, and we can look at it when I'm done. So now I have done the pinning, and I use these lines here in the mat to make sure that it is rectangular. And now it's just time for waiting until this one has dried. Usually it's the day after, and then I will release the pins and let dry for yet another day in order for the sample to find its own natural state, and then we will do the after measurements. So patience is key, not my strongest suit. One day has passed and the sample is dry now, so I will release the pins and see what happens, and I can compare to the unblocked one, and definitely it is wider now. And I am very tempted to do the measurements, but the final measurements will be waiting yet another 2 days, because I will now pin it in like this, so it hangs down with the border edge here, trying to resemble the wear of the sweater. And then I will pin it up here and leave it be in a vertical position, and then I will do the final measurements. Let me just put in these ones again, and this time I will not do anything to stretch it, actually the contrary, so that it can work in any direction it wants. So now we are here, and I will just place it like this. So we'll meet in 2 days and see the result. 2 days have now passed since I released the pins on this swatch on the blocking mat, and this is for comparison the swatch I've made earlier on. I guess it's a couple of weeks old, and as you can see, they now have exactly the same size. So this proves my point that ribbed pattern will breathe, it widens and finds its own natural state if you have the patience to wait. So patience is key. I know it's a big ask when you are making the gauge watching and you just want to start your project, but I assure you it's worth the wait so that you get the circumference that you need. So let me now take the final measurements of this swatch, and we will see. So 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 21, 22 stitches. And the pattern calls for 21 stitches. So this yarn with my knitting style is a bit tighter. So now I need to consider whether or not I would accept the size I was aiming for, which will give me less positive ease than in the pattern, or I can have a look at the size conversion chart to see the consequence of my knitting tension here and choose my size. But before we do so, let's also do the measurements on the row gauge, because in European shoulder design and making the yoke, the rows the row gauge is of course also of importance. The row gauge is 28 rows, and this is within the acceptable range of the pattern, I would say. So if you are off row gauge, one row on each side of the gauge recommendation, I think this would be very fine. Now that I know I'm off gauge stitch count wise, however within the tolerances of the rows, I have to look at the options what to do, and I have more possibilities. I can work with my needle size and needle material, or I can consult the size conversion table to see what happens if I preserve the stitch count I have here. So let's meet up in the next episode to look at these options and possibilities so that I can get started with my project.